Det USA Spesial, det fredag 15. november, og jeg ønsker Austin Rasmussen velkommen i studio.
Takk.
Du leder for Republicans Abroad i Norway.
Yes, that's right.
Ja, og du har bodd her i ganske mange år.
10 år nå.
Ja, og snakker, eller forstår norsk.
Jeg snakker norsk, jeg kan norsk, men jeg vil helst snakke engelsk når jeg diskuterer amerikansk politikk.
Ja, det forstår jeg. Men da kan vi gjøre det sånn at jeg kan jo stille noen spørsmål på norsk.
Det kan du.
Og bruke litt engelsk ord og uttrykk, sånn at folk har tråden.
Det passer fint.
Ja, og vi snakket litt før vi kom i gang her, og jeg var jo, du meget kunnskapsrik, du følger veldig godt med. Og det vi nordmenn alltid lurer på jo hvordan vi ser ut, hvor vi ligger i forhold til USA. Vi veldig nok så selvopptatte. Så hvordan ser du på norske mediers fremstilling av USA?
I follow Norwegian media very closely. Okay. It's in my same custom feeds as any other news sources I follow, but I don't rely on Norwegian media to get a picture of what's going on in the United States.
Of course not.
I'm consuming the Norwegian media because I participate in the media. I'm often, occasionally, when they're willing to speak to a Republican, asked to comment or analyze something that's going on. But the viewing of Norwegian media is simply to understand what the Norwegian media wants to say. And that's it.
Fordi jeg sa til deg her at så ensidig som norske medier og politikerne blitt, de jo totally aligned med the democratic narrative. Og det hvis man når avstanden så stor som den i USA, så betyr det at Norge konstant blind på det ene øyet?
The audience would be. The audience, if for those unfortunate enough to follow exclusively mainstream Norwegian media to understand the US politics, they're left with less than half of the picture of what's going on over there. And even in that narrow view is often misleading and very superficial information. Norwegian media content, the mainstream media content, I liken it more. The strategy behind it is similar to the strategy behind producing reality television. The purpose or the function of it is to get the maximum profitable engagement and to maintain some element of narrative control. The intent and purpose is certainly not to inform the masses so that the masses can walk away and make up their own mind in what they might think or how they might feel about a particular topic.
Helt riktig forstått. Vi har akkurat sammenfallende syn fordi de utfordrer eller provoserer jo kritisk tenkning.
It's more of what to think, not how to think or giving you the elements of what to think about. And I think they all kind of work hand in glove with each other. You have, in the United States, it's one of the reasons that led Trump to this victory is because people the degree of skepticism has increased so much that it's reached a tipping point. And you have the way that the establishment and what the media is often affectionately called the fourth estate, working so hand in glove. You have these people that are pulling the strings behind the scenes, and they are entrenched in their own with their own incentives and their own agendas, that they will do anything to make sure they maintain their position and power. And I think you get that more on LITE, light scale here in Norway. I mean, there's this Institute for Journalism here that does this survey on Norwegian journalists, asking them, when you vote, who do you vote for? And the vast majority of them, I think it's around 80 to 90%, align somehow with a total left-wing coalition, be it from Arbeiderpartiet all the way to SV and Rødt. And one, I find it, if you're willing to participate and call yourself a journalist and participate in such a poll, I'm already questioning your journalistic integrity at that point. But now you've done it, you've participated, and you've given some accurate depiction or an idea of what the Norwegian journalism standing is. And it's certainly not representative of the Norwegian people. The Norwegian people don't align 80 to 90% with that coalition. So how is it then we're supposed to trust what's being reported? And we have that same problem in the United States, although most of the journalists there, I don't think are participating in such polls. But it's apparent on how polarized the media landscape has become in the United States. You know, if someone is watching a certain network and that's all they're watching, then you probably know how they're going to vote.
So it's the same story in Denmark and Sweden, both with politicians and with journalists, and even polling.
Yeah.
In a poll in Denmark, 88% would vote for Kamala.
Yeah, I saw the TV2 one as well, about 84%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have such overwhelming margins, it means that they have a confirmation bias. They feel that, well, it's the only game in town.
Well, the thing is I think those polls that are happening in the Nordic nations share a lot in common with what went wrong in the United States as far as polling goes. One, they're asking a pool of 1,000 of their most loyal viewers how they might vote, and two, I remember earlier in this campaign cycle, I was referencing the betting markets, and the betting markets long ago predicted a Trump victory. And there were some people kind of ridiculing that idea. I was like, oh, those are just betting markets, they're volatile. I said, yeah, but this is where people are putting their money. It's not who they want to win, it's who they think will win. And these are two different approaches to understanding outcomes. The problem that I think one of the main or primary problems that American polling has is the same problem that Nordic polling has, is it forgets or it leaves out the variable that their trust for the plurality has eroded, their credibility has eroded to the extent that there is a large number of people who won't even answer your poll, aren't even willing to talk to you. They don't like you, they don't trust you, they don't trust what you have to say. They understand that you're just a fact of life, and that's it. And so when you go in to ask a population a question in the effort to poll which way the wind is blowing, and a large percentage of that population isn't willing to talk to you personally, already your polling effort is contaminated, and it's highly unlikely that you're going to get an accurate depiction of what's really going on.
So we struggle with this problem all the time, that there is this compact majority, quotation marks, who sees the world through Biden's eyes. And Obama's and Clinton's. And you told me that in 2016, you were invited to the foreign ministry here.
Well, yes, I was, to discuss the aftermath of the 2016 election. And we saw there a lot of what we're seeing, what we saw in this election, was that those in positions of power, and that time it was namely those in Stortinget. But in this election as well, you have just general party leadership and those that are responsible, that have a high degree of responsibility in how the government runs, but also almost a consensus in mainstream media in Norway, all of them openly and actively rooting for a victory in Kamala Harris with almost the same degree of confidence in her victory that they had in Hillary Clinton's victory.
Right.
And then, of course, that fell apart. And these two instances, these two elections, and the brazen violation of tradition, in the sense, not just tradition between Norway and the United States, but tradition in foreign diplomacy in the West in general, Whereas, can you imagine if President Trump were to take a tour to Norway, or even just go on a broadcast that had an international audience, and say, I, President Trump, endorse Erna Solberg, or I endorse Studa, or I endorse whoever, pick a character. That would be shocking, not only for Norwegians, but probably for the Nordics in general and throughout Europe, that a presidential or that an American leader of that caliber was getting involved in the election, and we would be rightfully shocked by that. And the reason we would be shocked by that is because, traditionally speaking, the idea of observing elections as a foreigner especially for allies, has been, we hope you all have a good election, and we look forward to working with whoever wins. And now they've kind of stepped in it. As far as Norway is concerned, I'm not worried at all. I think Trump himself and what he's doing is much, much bigger than the contempt that Norwegian leaders and media have for him. I think most of it will be business as usual between Norway and the United States, so I'm not giving some prognosis of doom and gloom or anything. I'm just saying that it's a bit sheepish, and a lot of the people who should be more responsible in the capacities that they have should feel very ashamed in how they conducted themselves throughout this campaign cycle, and even more ashamed that they learned nothing from 2016.
Right, and that's really the problem, because they are so convinced of their own righteousness.
Yes.
That it's actually just both a practical and a psychological problem.
Yeah. I talk to journalists quite frequently.
Yeah.
In a lot of those exchanges, especially right as the election was happening and it was becoming apparent that Trump was winning, I had a couple of notable experiences where I actually had to call out or confront the journalist I was speaking to, because and let them know. I said, you do realize that in this conversation we're having, you're more concerned with trying to convince me why I'm wrong. I can see in your body language and your facial expressions that you have an open contempt for how I feel about politics.
Oh, did you really say that?
Yes. So I'm not sure how you can expect us to have an honest interview when I know already that your job, you have not made it your mission here to report as a reporter, as a journalist. Every time you ask me a question and I give you an answer, you cut me off to give me your version. But you're not the story here. And that's the problem. Yeah. Journalists and those in the media have made too much of a story out of themselves, rather than being the channel through which we're supposed to get the real story.
This is really, you elucidate exactly the problem with Norwegian media. You're not the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because they are always the story.
Yes, they're always the story, and they're always the polite company, the standard bearers, and the one advantage that they have is that Norwegian people tend to have a much higher degree of trust than Americans, for example, and a much higher degree of complacency and a much higher degree of compliance. It's more go along to get along. And so I think that the trust in Norwegian media and the credibility that they have will outlast that of America's, but it still has an expiration date, because you can only lie and be caught lying so many times before the audience realizes that they have been abused.
But I must say there are a few black swans in that equation.
Yeah.
And one of them is war with Russia.
Yes, of course.
And Norwegians are very gullible people.
Yeah.
And even our government seems to be gullible.
I think gullible is the wrong word. I think trusting is the more accurate. Norwegians tend to have a trusting nature of authority. Norwegians don't typically question authority. And so when an authoritative figure is telling them something, Norwegians, it's in the nature to just trust what's being told. And gullible, I guess, is a byproduct of that, because if you trust the wrong thing and you don't verify, then of course gullibility is a byproduct of that. But it is this trusting nature, because it's not just the media. It's look at what we went through in COVID, everything that we were told in COVID.
But this doesn't really fit for me because all the information that's been coming out of the United States ever since 2016, Russiagate has not registered with Norwegian media.
No.
Not Hillary, not the corruption of the Hillary Foundation.
No, and the fact that was all contrived and manufactured, Russiagate, the going after, it was over 3 years of litigation and in the media and in court to try and take Trump down over a dossier that was completely funded and manufactured by the Clinton dynasty. And when that was found out, the whole thing was memory hold. The whole thing was just forgotten. All right, we can move on. You still find people that are this is what's concerning about it. You still find people today, especially those that vote Democrat, but even in Norway, you'll find some people that are absolutely convinced that Trump
is a Russian agent.
Yes. I mean,
but this fits the psychological warfare because you wage war on two fronts. Against Putin and against Trump.
Yeah.
And this journalism that's coming out of, I read NTB, everything they write about Trump and the United States. Today it was about the trade war, and most is taken from Associated Press.
Yes.
And the expression they use is that Trump seized power.
Yeah.
They don't write he won a landslide.
No.
They say he seized power.
Well, they don't use the same adjective. This is where the crack in credibility and objectivity comes in. They don't use the same adjectives and descriptions of Trump that they do for in the final weeks leading up to the election, about 3 or 4 weeks, the polls that mainstream media favors had Kamala Harris about a 0.5 percentage point ahead of Trump.
Right, neck and neck.
Which was still in the margin of error.
Yeah.
But when she clawed that 0.5 point above Trump in their favored polls, the Norwegian media went aflutter. There was, she's going to win, basically, and telling the Norwegian people, now she's done it, she's on the right track, she's coming. But then when Trump, it only took about a week for him to get back on top by statistically a much larger margin than Harris had over him, and suddenly quiet. There was no talk. I mean, you would have thought that if there was some objectivity, that the Norwegian media would have been using the same descriptions of Kamala. She's taking him down now. She's winning the election. She's the next president. Because of a 0.5 percentage point that they found in some obscure poll that was still within the margin of error. When Trump did the same by a higher margin, none of that was being said. But of course, it's no secret. We know that all of these people, they don't like Trump, they don't like Republicans, and they have a contempt for what we know now more than half of the United States stands for. And that is concerning. Again, I think we can use that survey that I mentioned earlier about how Norwegian journalists vote in Norway to understand that it's not surprising at all, because the Norwegian collective of journalists don't represent the Norwegian audience that they're talking to. They are not diverse. They do not have the same degree of diversity or representation as the Norwegian people do.
And I would say that things have really changed, because there used to be a confluence between government and the media and the public.
Yeah. Well, it used to be speak truth to power. It used to be the media was going to report something that somebody really didn't want to be reported. They were going to find real stories, and it was supposed to, the media used to serve a function of keeping the government in check. That if the government was going to step out of the line, the media was going to be the watchdog to bring them down. And today, they work together. They are in rooms and working together about what's the news going to be today? What are we going to talk about today?
They have sort of privatized the media for the journalist and the editorial room.
Yeah, not privatized enough in my view, in the sense that they still get a lot of public funding.
Of course.
And so then you have to think about that too. My taxes, your taxes are paying for something that goes against my principles as a taxpayer, goes against my values as a taxpayer, and I'm forced to pay that.
But they have also privatized the state, meaning that they don't feel any obligation.
No accountability.
No,
and there's when I'm asked to give I go to different events and venues and organizations to give talks about American politics, and one of the ones I like to give is to just explain that Norwegians, in fact, have a lot more in common with the Republican American than they think they do, than they realize they do. And there are a lot of different topics that I cover in that talk, but one of them is the issue of states' rights. And when you say states' rights, of course, that's not a movement that really translates well to Europe or Norway. But when explaining it, understanding, okay, in our Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, and the 10th Amendment of that Bill of Rights is the States' Rights Amendment, the one that explains that if there is no power in the Constitution, basically any power the federal government has to be written explicitly in the Constitution. If that power is not given to the government by the Constitution, then that power is then given to the states and the people. Meaning that that's why Roe v. Wade was overturned, for example, because there's nothing in the Constitution that allows for the federal government to regulate abortion.
Right.
But how I translate that to Europe and the states' rights issue in America is that here in Norway, historically, we had two referendums on whether or not Norway wanted to join the European Union. And both times there was a conclusive no. And polls indicate, however much you want to trust them, that if you had a similar referendum today, the result would be the same. The Norwegian people are opposed to joining the European Union. Why is that? Because we don't want to dilute our autonomy and our sovereignty with some foreign bureaucrat in Brussels. We want to maintain our independence and be able to say what we can and can't do for ourselves. Now, that is the will of the people, and is still the will of the people, and has been decidedly the will of the people for decades. Yet, Norway has the best reputation in Europe for implementing European Union policy.
That's right.
Because the politicians and the leaders of this country are constantly, daily, violating the will of the people by entering the nation under the jurisdiction or under the restrictions of the European Union. And only because these politicians understand that once their tenure has expired in Norway, if they play ball, they'll have some other comfortable job on the... I mean, how many of the last, 5 prime ministers of Norway still live in Norway? They all know that there's something waiting for them on the other side as long as they play with that same establishment power. And that's where it all ties together. And I'm not saying that there's some highly competent or organized, dark, conspiracy or anything like that. But what I am saying is that all of these elements share something in common, and that they are the established power. They are the establishment. They are the status quo. And we have that problem in the United States. We have that problem in Europe. We have that problem all throughout the West. And that's one of the main reasons Trump won the election, is because he represented a challenge to that status quo. The people he was surrounding himself with represented a challenge to that. We can see him now as he's piecing together his cabinet and administration. The people that he's picking, these people probably would never have worked together a day in their lives if not for this one juncture in their lives to bring them all together for this moment.
And it's really a historic moment.
It absolutely is. And all of their political futures don't hinder on getting a book deal or leaking something to the press, or playing with the deep state, as it's been called affectionately, or the media. Their political futures depend on the success of this administration, which means they have to work together. And if they fail, it wouldn't be the first time Republicans fail with power in hand, but they need to work together and they need to be successful.
So let's just dwell on some of the tasks that they have to do in order to succeed. And one of them is accountability for all the power abuse, the weaponization of government since 2016. And there is a strong resentment, not just in the Democratic Party, but also among Republicans. because they have so many skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can all hope and look forward to this administration bringing those out of the closet, draining the swamp as was promised in 2016. It remains to be seen how successful he's going to be in that, but some of the people he's put in key positions, I think, are competent enough to grind those axes and pursue those efforts.
There is a bit of American mythology here. Profiles in courage, and the American hero is still alive, I will say, in Trump and his people.
Yeah.
I mean, a person like Elon Musk is really a heroic figure in some sense.
They have a base swallowing. The fact is, Trump could not have won without when after Biden was inaugurated. In anyone else in Trump's position at that point could have easily hung their hat up and went home, especially at his age. Could have hung their hat up and said, "All right, I gave it my best. I've got all this money and all these properties. I'm just going to go live the rest of my life as a happy, retired, quiet man." Any other man in his position could have easily been tempted by that future. But him, one thing he did so effectively, and I'm not sure that there are many other politicians that could have done it as well as he did, but he managed to maintain morale and momentum in his base, rally after rally. And it wasn't just campaign season, starting January 2024, we're going to get ready for November. He had done this consistently for 3.5 years since 2016 election. He has been rallying his base and making sure that their motivation stays on point. And some might ask, well, why is that important? Because none of those people were going to change their vote anyways. They're always going to vote for him. No, but there has to be a focal point for 4 years. He has to stay relevant for 4 years. And him rallying his base is the way to do that, because not only does it give somebody something to watch, but then these people also have families and colleagues and other lives beyond those rallies that they need to go and interact with that world. And that was if he had not done that, he might not have even been the candidate this election. But he did a remarkable job at maintaining that momentum, which is a crux of his victory.
I remember when the crowd started to say, "We love you." And he, for the first time, said back, "I love you too."
One thing about Trump, this campaign, I think Trump did very well, which was an absolutely necessary shift in his demeanor and his public appearance. He was a lot warmer this election. He had a lot more of a warmth about him. He had almost a kind of grandpa kind of figure, grandpa of America, kind of, okay, I'm here to clean up your mess now, kind of, I love you, but we got to fix this, and he had that. He didn't have that demeanor in 16 and 20. In 16 and 20, it was much more abrasive. It was much more aggressive. But this time, it was the "I love you too" kind of response, and that was an important shift for him, because there's a lot of Americans who a lot of people in general. It's human nature for so many to have their nose led around by emotion. And if they get turned off, their emotions get turned off by anything, then they'll shut down and go the other way.
That's right.
And so you can lead a lot of Americans on logic and reason and policy points, but there's a whole other swath of Americans that you can only appeal to based on emotion. And changing that demeanor to a more grandfatherly figure that he did, I'm convinced he did, was a key factor in attracting those Americans.
You're an astute observer, I must say. Trump is saving America because America is still America. I mean, Obama's America is not America. It's anti-America.
It was destroying America. It was dividing America.
Yes.
Before Obama, I think there's a good argument to be made that it was around that 2009, 2010, when Republicans took over in Obama's first midterm elections, where the really hard track of polarization that we're on right now kind of began.
Yeah.
There's no doubt America had some very strong disagreements before that, namely the Iraq War and our conflicts in the Middle East. But as far as dividing the soul of America, I would root that back to around 2009, 2010. And I hope I hope that is resolved with this administration. One of the picks that he's had in his cabinet now is Tulsi Gabbard. I'm looking forward to seeing what she does. I think she'll. Again, we discussed this earlier. Some of the people he's picking, if you were to put them in more broad policy positions, I might take more of an issue with it. RFK Jr., for example, I probably don't agree with a lot of his politics, but I really think he's quite intelligent when it comes to health and the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry and how these industries operate and how they collude with the government and how it's destroying American health. And picking him to be in charge of health, if he stays in that lane, I think it's fantastic. Tulsi Gabbard, anti-war, has been to war herself, and I truly believe values individual liberties and privacy. And so putting her in that position, I think, was a great pick. When it comes to economic policy and all these other policy arenas that she could have been in, I probably would have had a problem. But for the lane that he put her in, it's perfect. In fact, I remember back when Tulsi Gabbard was running for president for the Democrat Party.
I remember.
And I was asked by some journalists as an exercise, if you had to vote for a Democrat, if you had to cast your ballot for a Democrat, who would, it was a big field. It was over 20 candidates running for president at the time. Which one of these Democrats would you vote for? Which one would you as a Republican hope to win? Which one could you live with as president? And my first answer was Tulsi Gabbard. And I had to clarify that. I said, it's not because I think she, there's a lot of policies her I like, and a lot of them, most of them, I probably, there's someone better than her for that, for me. But I think she has the most potential at that time. She had the most potential of, I think, any Republican or Democrat of actually, if anyone was going to fix the polarization problem that we have, or at least get us back on course, getting neighbors talking again and kind of healing that divide we have, I think she could have done that. If I had to live with a Democrat as president, I think she's the only one that had potential for that. So to see now where we were then, and fast forward to 2024, where she has now been shunned from her party, left her party, was an independent for a while, then joined the Republican Party, and is now serving in the exact capacity I would choose her for if I were in Trump's position. I think it's great. He's making a lot of good moves, and in this, there's some, I'm questioning. I'll wait and see how they turn out before I criticize them. But a lot of them I'm happy with, and it looks like he's putting together a more loyal cabinet, which is really important. I saw a Norwegian commentator a couple of days ago, or yesterday maybe it was, I can't remember which one it was, but it was such a funny, he was asked what he thought about Trump's cabinet picks so far. Elon Musk in this new department, and RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and Hegseth for defense. Anyway, and Matt Gaetz for AG. And so he's asking, what do you think about these cabinet picks? Or at least he was answering as if that question had been asked of him. And he said, well, one thing's for sure, Trump is proving that he likes people who are loyal around him, as if that was a bad thing. As if any politician wouldn't pick any. But the Norwegian media, these commentators, these experts, there's with such an inflation of USA experts, they're throwing this around like, oh no, Trump is going to pick people who are only loyal to him, as opposed to what? And we did see a problem in 2016. You had too many people in his administration that were more concerned with the book deals they were going to get on the other. One of Trump's biggest mistakes, I think he made, was hiring Tom Bolton in his administration. Who hires Bolton? Bolton is one of the architects of our conflicts in the Middle East.
John Bolton.
John Bolton. Sorry, John Bolton. John Bolton is one of the architects of our conflicts in the Middle East, and a lot of death and destruction, and certainly an element of that deep state swamp that Trump was supposed to drain. And I think a lot of Republicans were turned off by that pick. And then you had a lot of them that just absolutely stabbed him in the back and betrayed him through the first term. And I think he probably learned something from that. He doesn't have to worry about a re-election this time. So there's no leash on him.
But if we talk about accountability, it goes all the way back to the killing of Kennedy.
Yeah.
I mean, Americans want to know the truth.
To declassify those.
They want to know the truth.
He promised he would. He promised he would declassify all of that intelligence, and I don't see why he wouldn't. I can't see a reason why he wouldn't let that go. I mean, it's been a long time now.
I heard it was Mike Pompeo and Marco Rubio
that stopped him.
That stopped him.
Yeah.
And then you have the falsehood of the pretext for going to war in Iraq.
Yeah.
That was also false.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of cleaning house to do.
Yes.
And Americans want the never-ending war.
Yeah.
This concept is totally strange to Norwegians.
Well, not strange anymore, I don't think. Norway has historically a reputation for being a channel for peace, for facilitating peace. But I think they've lost that mantle.
Yeah.
Trump is the only president in my lifetime that did not engage the United States in any new wars and actually put plans in place to get us out of the ones we were in. And we can see, for example, in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, my theory on this is that when we bungled our withdrawal from Afghanistan, when Biden took us out and caused the death of those 13 American soldiers, that was the end of an era for the military-industrial complex. We had 20 years there where that was essentially their playground. That was the place for the contractors, for the weapons manufacturers, for the defense professionals, for all of these people to go play around in, to test their new weapons and play with their new toys. And there was a lot of money in that. A lot of families and people got very rich through corrupt means, and it cost a lot of lives for American soldiers over that 2-decade period. And I think once we withdrew from there, that complex, military-industrial complex, had nothing but incentive to find a new playground. And I think they're finding that in Eastern Europe right now. I think they're finding that in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And one way that I hope Trump proves himself early as president again is by being the first, because if he does this, he'll be the first leader in the West to actually talk about a peace solution in Ukraine-Russia. I have yet to hear a single world leader in the West talk about concluding that conflict. Not one. The only talk I hear is how are we going to get more tax money to Ukraine? How much more tax money are we going to get to them? How much more weapons? And pushing us closer and closer to the brink of World War III, especially with the other conflicts we have going on. And the only way that conflict, if anybody, I think, the only way that conflict gets resolved is if you get both of these parties at the negotiation table on the premise and understanding that neither of them are going to walk away with everything they want.
Of course.
But no one is acknowledging that reality. It's all or nothing. And we expect, Putin to pull out at some point, and then this, ginned up fears about Putin invading other countries and starting a war with the rest of Europe. He can't even conquer Ukraine. But he can certainly drain them. He can certainly keep kicking the can down the road, and so can we. And I think that's what we're seeing at the expense of an entire generation of young men who are dying on both sides of this conflict.
Yes.
And no one is taking that into consideration. Everyone who's flying the Ukrainian flag on their profile picture on social media as if this is some sporting event and they're supporting Manchester United over Arsenal or whatever. This is a lot more serious than that, and people aren't taking it that seriously.
That's right.
They're taking it very emotionally, but they're not taking it seriously as into however the war ends, we need to stop this dying. We need to stop this slaughter of young men.
Yes. But now I read interestingly that...
Sorry, one more point on that, because
Yes.
it actually ties into Norwegian media quite well in the coverage. Trump, just before the election, made this comment about Liz Cheney when she went to this campaign event for Kamala Harris. And he made this comment because the Cheneys, no one likes the Cheneys. It was a really bad call for Harris to bring her to a campaign event. And one of the points that Trump was hitting on was the fact that the Cheneys are among those neocon war hawks from the Bush era. And they're constantly pushing for more war and constantly pushing for more war spending. And in response to this, at one of his rallies or speeches, Trump said, you know, if they really feel that strongly about it, then why doesn't Liz Cheney go on the front line of one of these conflicts and see what it's really like? You're going to send these young men to go die for it. Why don't you go stand on the front line and see how you like having, I'm paraphrasing,
yes,
you know, but
yes.
And of course the Norwegian media jumped on that. I had random people who dug up my phone number and were sending me text messages. Oh yeah, I get that quite often. You wouldn't believe some of the hate I get and the messages, and I eventually stopped telling my wife about it because there were some points, especially in the 2020 election, where my wife was getting concerned. But after he had said that, there were many Norwegians who read what the press was saying. The press was reporting it as Trump was advocating the assassination of Liz Cheney, which is not at all what he meant or what he said. But that's how it was reported broadly in Norway. Broadly enough that people, again, were digging up my number to write me, how can you vote for a man that is asking for another politician to be assassinated in his own country? And it was just, but that's the nature of the media. That's the nature of what they're reporting. Subject had a great response to that in asking a very important question. Do Norwegian media professionals speak and understand English well enough to be able to accurately analyze American politics?
But you know, you can listen to CNN and MSNBC and hear their talking points. And the word just goes ricochet between Norway and
it's an echo chamber. It's just recycled content. It's recycled, translated, and published. It's not given any critical thought. It's not given a second look. It's just distilled. And it's not even, you'd be better off just watching CNN because it's not even everything that CNN's saying. It's just the distilled talking points through a funnel.
Joy Reid.
Yeah, exact. Joy Reid, any of those talking heads. What ends up in the Norwegian press is just brought down through a funnel, so you're not even getting all their content, which is bad enough. It's bad enough watching them, but to just get the worst of what they're saying,
Nicole Wallace,
as being the truth. Unfortunately, many are left misinformed and ignorant of American politics.
And still, they tell us that Trump is the violent guy.
Yeah, he's the second coming of Hitler.
So I mean,
I remember when Vega had a picture of Trump on their cover. And they gave him a Hitler mustache. You know, that what they're telling the people is, you know.
So even now, after this election, the front page of Aftenposten had only, the whole page was Trump as a buccaneer, pirate on the ship.
Yeah, as if he stole something.
This is the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, what they look like inside?
Well, it reminds me of the illustration that The Atlantic had on their cover a little while back, where Trump was, it was a very dark scene. I mean, like a haunted horror film, you know, crows and dead trees. And at the end of the path was the White House. And Trump was, you know, this kind of 1920s circus director, and he's driving the circus wagon, and the elephant you could see in the cage dying in the back, you know, and it's this image that he's caged to the party and he's riding them to the White House, and it's this kind of propagandistic Gothic Pravda kind of imagery, and.
But the myth or allegory that latches on to Trump's real status is more like a soldier emperor in the Roman Republic who came in to save the Republic.
Yeah, I think if anyone can do it, it will be him. If he can right the ship and get us back on course, he has a lot of work to do in the next 4 years in order to make that happen. And I think he's laying the groundwork in order to do that. One thing I think his most ardent opponents are afraid of is, and I mentioned this in a recent interview as well, was that they know that we know they're lying. And what's more is what's really concerning them, the root of a lot of the madness that we're seeing today, is that they also know that if they don't do something, at the end of this 4-year period, when Trump is done with his presidency, the whole world will know that they were lying.
Yes, of course.
And that's, he will not become any of those nightmares we were promised. He will not, he's not going to be Hitler. He's not going to be tearing down the institution of democracy in the United States. He's not going, I mean, aside from the fact that there's simply no mechanism that gives him that power, there's no mechanism. I mean, it takes a basic American Civics 101 class to understand how American government works. And there's no mechanism in place that grants the president any kind of degree of power matching the nightmares we've been promised. But putting that aside, Trump is not that man anyway. Even if he had that power, it's not something that I would be concerned about. But he doesn't. And all of these things that we have been promised, I think at the end of this 4 years, if we can manage to keep our memory that long, the general public, then those who lied to us for so long will have no credibility left to stand on.
But there are hurdles along the way, and one of them, the process of accountability, is a painful one.
Yes.
Because what if now it turns out that 2020 was stolen?
Yeah, that would be an interesting development.
Because you have seen probably the chart of how many votes Obama got. Yeah. Obama got.
Or Biden.
Kamala. And Biden.
Oh, sorry, you mean the comparisons. Oh,
the comparison.
You mean the total counts. Yes, sorry, I thought you were talking about that that ballot drop that happened in 2020.
That is underlying. But of course, I mean,
where did the 20 million votes go, or whatever the number is missing?
81 million votes, and there are 7-8 million
missing. Yeah.
Inexplicable.
Yeah.
Where did they come from?
Yeah, and where did they go?
Yeah.
No, I've seen those charts. I've seen that there was a pretty consistent turnout from Obama to Trump's first term, and then now this term.
Yeah.
But that one Biden election is sky high.
Yes.
No, I have seen that, and it'll be interesting to see what they find out. There are a lot of things that need to be looked at here. Of course, the weaponization of the Justice Department is another one, and how the Biden administration kind of put the United States on the same plane as any average banana republic with what they did with our justice system. So yeah, there are a lot of. It is going to be a painful process.
And Ted Cruz asks, "Can you please tell us how many FBI informants and agents were present
at January 6th?" Yeah.
And they won't answer.
No, they won't. And we know that they were there. We have the evidence that they were there.
Yeah.
We also have tens of thousands of hours of security footage that adds a lot of necessary context to how we characterize that event. And it certainly is not anywhere near what, for the worst of it I hear is insurrection. It wasn't any of that. It was a protest gone bad. There are a lot of suspicious things that happened around, doors being opened and
right.
But the only person that died as a result of that was a protester that was shot and killed by the police. And
Norwegian media still rise.
5 police officers died. I know, which is an absolute lie.
Yes.
It's a blatant lie.
Yeah.
And all it would take is, because of how search engines work these days, and they themselves are quite biased, but to look at the legal documentation of what happened that day and what unfolded, it would not take much in-depth research to find that this is a lie. 5 police officers did not die then. But you're right. Even today, when I see something referencing January 6th, that is always thrown in as if it's just an accepted truth at this point, and it is basically an accepted truth.
In Norway, it is.
Yeah.
And when I discuss this with even representatives of the press organization, and I say, "Have you heard about 6th of January that it was infiltrated?" They refuse to believe it.
No, yeah, it is not a proved narrative.
Yeah. I say it's almost, in the 60s and 70s we were radicals.
Yeah.
And then it turned Stalinist. It's almost like we've become Stalinists.
Yeah. And there are many features of today that definitely are in line with that.
Yeah.
Trump, there were 2 attempted assassinations on his life. And I was asked for my reaction immediately after those happened, and my reaction to the second one when it happened, or maybe it was the first, but in any case, it doesn't matter which one because the principle still the same, is what do you think about this assassination attempt? And of course, it was shocking. It was all these things. But for me, my first response was, well, this was inevitable. This was inevitable. This was going to happen. We knew this was going to happen. Well, why was it inevitable? Well, because can you put yourself in the position as an average citizen where you're being just lied to all day long. You're being told that this man represents the destruction of your country. This man is the second coming of Hitler. Everyone has been asked this philosophical, jokish question: if you could strangle baby Hitler, would you? And that's the position you're putting a lot of Americans who may not have all of their mental wherewithal about them, and you're putting them in that position. You're telling them, this is Hitler. If he gets elected, if he gets the Oval Office back, we're done. It's over. And so you are actively convincing these people that they need to do something about it. Because if I really believed that, I would be pretty ashamed if I didn't find something to do about it. If I really believed that this guy was going to come in and do something in line with killing millions and millions of people, millions of his own countrymen, if I believed that someone was on par with that and was on their way to taking power, I'd probably be looking for some resistance movement to join as well. And that's the point. He's not. If he was any of these things, we would first of all seen it in his first term. He's already, many people forget that, especially Norwegians. He's already been president. He was president for 4 years, and none of that tenure had an ounce of the track record that you're alluding to. And so it's.
But now the narrative is that he is so emotional and impulsive, but he had people around him who controlled him.
Yeah.
And this time he has only loyalists. That's why they use the term loyalist.
Yeah. And
so now he's out of control.
Again, it's this kind of recycled narrative that keeps going, because if you only play the little sound bites that we get to hear in the mainstream press over and over and over and over and over again, then you start to believe that. I mean, I've talked to people. I was on a network the other day where one of the people there told me with a straight face, I just don't know how he won. I said, okay. I said, well, he did. And they said, yeah, but he can't even finish a sentence.
Oh.
How did he win? He can't even speak straight. I don't understand how anybody could vote for him. But they presented themselves to me. The reason that they were there was because that they were supposed to be an expert on American politics. They were supposed to be an expert on the developments happening in the campaign and the election, and they really believed this. It's like, there's.
But when I went into the bookshop and looked up, because two figures or more, three, have written books about Trump and the election.
Yeah, I know.
Noen and Lahlum.
Yeah.
And I looked, and Lahlum's book, really big book, with lots of notes. And I could see they were rehashing all the lies from Liz Cheney and the 6th of January Commission. I think there are direct links between the machinery in Washington and these journalist authors.
There needs to be a serious investigation into what happened in that commission. And yes, I see that there are a lot of media professionals. That's the whole point of setting up those commissions, I think. That everybody knew that nothing was going to come out of that commission to get Trump. I mean, yes, they impeached him, but there's no conviction of Trump. There's nothing here to convict him on. And it's still on his Facebook page as his last, but when he got kicked off of Facebook, his last post on the whole page was, everybody needs to be peaceful today. Everybody, he was calling for peace. He was asking everybody, we need to have, asking for a normal procedural day. And everybody knew that this commission that they were putting in place was only, the purpose of it solely was to manufacture a citation source. That was it. You can, because it's official, right? All these professional politicians are sitting on a committee that they made, and they decided who was going to be there, and everyone knows how all of these people feel. There's no objective investigation happening here. These are the quickest impeachment efforts in the history of America. And any time that anyone has ever thought about impeaching a president, this can take years to do that, to do a rigorous investigation on the crimes that you're accusing the president of the United States. These took a matter of weeks. You cannot call it a serious effort, but the whole basis of it was, one, to create to manufacture a citation source so that journalists authors like the ones here in Norway can say, this is what happened, and we know this is what happened because this is what Liz Cheney said. And so that when all of these people are campaigning for office against Trump and against Trump endorsement candidates, they can say, Trump was impeached Not only was he impeached once, but he was impeached twice. They knew nothing constructive or productive was going to come out of those efforts. They probably knew that they had no leg to stand on in even pursuing those efforts. Not in good faith, not in good standing. The only purpose of it was to create a talking point for a future campaign. That was it. And the same with the commission. It was laying the groundwork down so that you could create a foundational source for propaganda in the future for the purposes of campaigning.
And stopping it.
Yes.
Because the initiative that was taken in Colorado and Maine and a few other, that he was not allowed, he should not be on the ballot.
Yeah.
Because they went back to the Civil War.
Yeah.
And there was no accident that they compared it to the Civil War.
Yeah. Well, now you see this governors of those same states who are organizing resistance mechanisms in their states. I don't even know what they mean by that, but both governors have come out and said that they're going to be organizing, or they are organizing, their state administrations are organizing efforts to make sure that their states are protected from Trump policy, that they won't be affected by Trump policy. Now,
like Newsom.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the states' rights side of me kind of likes that in principle, in theory. Like, okay, it's your state, run your state however you want. Yeah. But that's also kind of Trump's point when he's coming in, is the whole point of gutting the federal government is to reduce the government in scope and scale, is to say, you're right, the federal government doesn't have these powers. Trump is not talking about a national ban on anything. He's not talking about any of the things that these people are afraid of. Abortion, for example. These blue states are really concerned about abortion. This is another area where Norwegians may have more in common with Republicans than they think they do. This is often forgotten in this, or not even, I don't think, known by Norwegians when it comes to this policy. Before Roe v. Wade was overturned, I would have these conversations, and Europeans in general, the response to the conversation was, we don't understand how you crazy Americans are still debating this topic. We settled that issue years ago in Europe, but somehow you all are still fighting about it. I was like, well, yes, and there's a reason that does deserve context. In Europe, in Norway, and most of Europe, you have a consensus around abortion policy. And that is, you have a 12-week maximum on abortion limits, with exceptions up to 16 weeks for special exceptions, depending on the circumstances. Before Roe v. Wade was overturned in the United States, you had a large number of states that had no limit on abortion, meaning that the mother could go and kill her baby on the day it was due to be born, if she wanted. And there's still a lot of states that don't have any limits. Even after Roe v. Wade was overturned, you still have that situation. And of the states that had any limitation on abortion, the lowest limit in America was 22 weeks. So that's 22 weeks compared to the highest in Europe for special exceptions at 16 weeks. So Republicans, conservatives, when they were having an issue with the policy, many moderate Republicans, I would say most moderate Republicans, were just pursuing abortion policy that was more in line with what Europe already had. And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, as I mentioned earlier, it was on the idea that the federal government has no legal authority to regulate this. So this is another point where the people who support Harris and Democrats have been lied to, is that the fear-mongering around, if Trump wins, he's going to come in and he's going to put a national ban on abortion. Well, no. Roe v. Wade being overturned, again, means the federal government has no legal authority to regulate this. Meaning, if Harris wanted to come in, as she was promising to do, and get the abortion policy back to the pre-turning of Roe v. Wade, or if Trump, which he has never said he wanted to do, is going to come in and ban abortion altogether, he has never said that, but the press represent him as being that candidate. It doesn't matter which view of the world you have, neither candidate for president has the power to do it. That was the whole point of overturning Roe v. Wade. And that's why I was very, very doubtful that abortion was going to influence the election very much, is because in those states that were very pro-abortion, whenever we want, however we want, whenever we want to do it, rah, 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 those states' laws aren't changing. If anything, those states' abortion laws are becoming more liberal than they already were. And in the states where they're implementing new abortion restrictions to varying degrees, they're implementing those restrictions at the behest of the constituents that elected them. the legislators that are writing these laws were elected by the people of their state to write those laws. And I've been told that democracy is the most important thing. So, so I didn't think that abortion was going to influence the election.
You say it couldn't have been legislated, but they actually planned for a coup.
Yeah.
They wanted to abolish filibuster.
Yes.
They wanted to get rid of the electoral college. Mm-hmm. They wanted to fill up the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And the popular vote would decide the election.
Yeah.
And this would be in the name of democracy, but it would be one-party rule.
Yes. For a period, yes. Nothing in politics is static or permanent, but this whole debate around the Electoral College is a silly one, I think, and it comes up every election. Here it wouldn't have mattered because Trump got the popular vote anyway. But Democrats have always had or at least in the last 20 to 30 years, probably since Bush 2, have had a problem with the Electoral College. And every election it comes up in constant debate. We need to reform or eradicate the Electoral College. That conversation, to me, is the epitome of a moot conversation. And the reason is because the Electoral College is enshrined in our Constitution. And there are many constitutional scholars who argue that, yes, even though it is possible to amend the Constitution, in fact, that part of the Constitution that includes the Electoral College cannot be amended.
Oh, really?
And now, of course, that remains to be determined by a court if we ever get to that point. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that those scholars are wrong. And it's not a consensus. I'm saying some scholars believe that, and they have an argument for it. And let's say that part of the Constitution can be changed. It is virtually impossible to change the Constitution today in America. Anything you want. It could be the greatest of intentions, where you're promising the sky and to everybody and have the will to make it happen. It would be virtually, with as polarized as the United States is, it would be virtually impossible to change anything in the Constitution today. I think we have 27 amendments. The last of them, I think, was ratified in the early 90s, and I believe that amendment took almost 100 years to get. It was one of these formality amendments that there wasn't a lot of will to get it through. But in order to change the Constitution, you need a convention of states. First, you need to get the states to agree that they want a convention. Then, in order to get them to agree, you have to have a supermajority. So you have to get 75% of the states to agree on that change. You have to have a supermajority in Congress. You have to have the president. I mean, there's all of these hurdles in place on purpose.
But Austin, if you import 20 million now in 4 years, another 20 million in the next 4 years, you have the majority.
It depends on where you place them, but yes.
All the states were border states.
Yes, yes. I mean, there were some further north that were getting it too. I mean, we saw in Ohio with the Haitians, for example.
Yes.
It depends on where you place them and how you want to upend the numbers. I think some of that over time will backfire, though, because a lot of these immigrants are coming from places that are very conservative in nature. That's why we saw Trump outperformed every Republican before him across the board in demographics. He outperformed with the black vote. He outperformed with he got almost half of the Latino vote. Almost half of the Hispanics in America voted for Trump. And the reason for that is because Hispanics typically come from a culture that places a high value on the institution of family. And Democrat policy for the last decade or more has been willfully trying to destroy that institution.
Yes.
And so it's an interesting strategy, but long-term, big picture, I don't think that works out best in the Democrats' favor. The real problem we have with what they're doing is not necessarily that it can change elections, which it can. I'm not denying that, especially at the local and state level. Those imported immigrants absolutely can have an effect. But the real problem we have is the 500,000 criminals that they let loose in the interior.
Exactly.
And the 250,000 that are still waiting, they have pending criminal charges against them. And then of them, at least 15,000 who are convicted murderers, just let loose and running around in the public. Not being vetted. We don't know who they are, where they are, what they're doing. And that's one of the bigger jobs that Trump has in front of him. And then building some kind of physical barrier. Another thing that Norwegians have in common with Republicans. Norwegians I'm an immigrant, now a citizen. There's a lot of red tape I had to navigate through in my experience here. Norway essentially closed its borders 50 years ago, essentially. No, not many people in the world can wake up this morning and decide, I want to go live in Norway. Not many people can do that. There are very few exceptions to legally get into this country. And it's not a wildly debated topic. Yes, Norwegians will debate certain things about immigration, but there's not a big debate on immigration policy. Norway also enjoys a physical barrier on its borders where it's necessary, and there's no question about whether or not that should be funded and that it should be funded by taxes. And what Trump is advocating for is still more liberal than Norwegian immigration policy. But how he's represented in the Norwegian public sphere is that he's a xenophobic racist when the exact policies he's trying to put in place are still more liberal than the average Norwegian wants.
Let me broach one more subject, Austin, and that's the problem of bureaucracy. Because the papers they think Pete Hegseth is not qualified. But I was listening this morning to an interview he did with Sean Ryan. And because Pete Hegseth has been working with the Veterans Association, and he said they're just preoccupied with one thing: more people, bigger offices, more money, bloated bureaucracy. And I have the feeling it's the same all over the West, that the bureaucracy becomes self-perpetuating. And it has to stop, because they're only asking for more money, higher taxes.
It's a burgeoning machine.
Yes.
To put it this way, when you open a new, for example, Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Now, the purpose of that new department, its end game is basically the metric of its own success will be whether or not it can shut itself down. If it can close itself, meaning its mission has been fulfilled and it's no longer needed. But that is not the nature of bureaucracy. It is not the nature. I'm hoping, of course, that this department, because of who's running it and who's behind it, that it will prove to be an exception. And I hope I'm right. But the nature of bureaucracy is not to do its job so efficiently that it renders itself unuseful. And it is a burgeoning machine, and unfortunately, this is something we have in common between the United States and Norway, is that the vast majority of rules and regulations that govern our day-to-day lives, that interfere with our day-to-day lives, that interfere with our business and whether or not we can run a business, those regulations, almost all of them, are implemented by bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats that cannot be fired. And they have no incentive to serve the people. They have no incentive to serve the customer. They have only their own interests at heart and only their own job security. And there is no better way for a bureaucrat to ensure their job security than to do its job badly. Because in doing so, they can secure more funding, as you said, they can secure more employments and give the appearance that they are, in fact, crucial, that we do need them. I mean, this is one thing that both Americans and Norwegians, I say, are extremely indoctrinated on, is the necessity of bureaucrats. You know, this kind of
indispensable.
It's the idea. You know, when you talk about getting rid of certain departments and letting the market determine what's necessary based on organic demand, then the response you often get from people who are so entrenched in the status quo is say, well, then, you know, what about the children and who will build the roads? It's this appeal to emotion rather than any degree of critical thinking about whether or not these things are necessary. But that is the nature of bureaucracy, is to only grow. And we can see that in all bureaucracies, but especially those that affect our everyday lives, like military, like education, like these departments and bureaucracies that impact any normal person who's raising a family and worried about their security and their privacy and all of these things.
And I heard that the bureaucrats in Washington have not returned to work. They are still working at home.
Yeah.
2 years after the pandemic.
Yeah.
This has become a privilege that ordinary people don't have.
No.
And nobody knows really the productivity.
It's almost impossible to measure.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elon Musk was actually one of the first to call this out post-pandemic. Was for his own employees.
He fired them.
He fired them.
Yeah.
He said, and a lot of these people, they got so comfortable working from home that they even moved elsewhere. They said, well, I can do this from anywhere. So they moved far, far away from the plant or the office or wherever it was that they were working. And Musk gave him a deadline and said, if you're not back in the office by Monday at 9, you don't have a job anymore. And the bureaucrats, of course, if they can manage to do everything from a computer, then yes, they will still be working from home even now. But this is one of the things that we're hoping that Elon Musk, in charge at the helm of this new department, with all of his experience in running organizations, but also experiencing specifically this inefficiency and getting rid of it, hoping that he can locate and identify all of these bureaucrats and get rid of them.
It's hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. I really, really hope that this administration takes a Reagan-esque approach to this type of... I remember when, I don't remember because I think I had just been born, but one of my favorite aspects of Reagan's presidency was when you had these these air traffic controllers going on strike. And he said, you are an essential function. You serve an essential function. If you're not back at work at this time, you're all fired. And then he did it. And he fired them all. Yeah. And I hope that kind of blunt, black and white, here are your options, take it or leave it, and then move on. Thatcher
did the same.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
So that's why they hated her.
Yeah.
You know?
And still do. Yeah. But I think she was one of the greatest greatest leaders of the West in our modern time. Yeah.
So...
For that reason.
Exactly. It's about restoring authority.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily restoring authority, but establishing what the authority is. And what its function is. I think this is one of the main problems that the United States has right now. One of the kind of the root of the problem is that Democrats and Republicans, or conservatives and liberals, capital L, or progressives, or whatever you want to call, a lot of the polarization and where it's gotten us now, of course, there's a lot of triggers that led us here, but the root of it is that we can no longer agree on what the role of government is. Which means that it's very difficult to have any conversation about bipartisan compromise or coming to some result at the end, because if you and I can't even agree what the government's supposed to do, then how are we going to agree on the policy of that government? It leaves very little room for agreement.
The root problem, as I see it, is that liberal democracy has moved so far left that a politician can argue for subverting the police. Kamala Harris was supporting Minnesota Freedom Fund. And that should disqualify her from running for any office. Instead, she's the candidate for the president.
Yes. And she was openly advocating for criminals to be released. Yeah. And then on that's on the backside. On the front side of her career, she put many people away in prison for crimes that had no victim, namely when it came to smoking marijuana. And the only reason I bring that up is because she was the prosecutor that landed a lot of these young people in prison for crimes that had no victim. And then when she herself was asked if she'd ever experimented with drugs, namely marijuana, she did that very creepy cackle that she has and reminisced about her wonderful times experimenting with marijuana, leaving all of us on my side, kind of dumbfounded. Well, then how could you have a career where you're locking people up for that same crime and then go on national television and laugh about committing the same crime? It's either a crime or it isn't. And so, yeah.
But we are on the same slippery slope.
Yeah.
I mean, Norway is moving exactly the same direction as the Democratic Party of the United States. This is why they are so vehemently fighting against Trump.
Yeah.
They understand if he succeeds, they will have to change.
I think they're going to have a rude awakening anyway, because, for example, there was that Ipsos poll that came out a few weeks ago that showed, they asked Norwegians who would they vote for in the election. Now, of course, on TV2, we see 85%, 84% would vote for Kamala Harris. But in the Ipsos poll, which is a lot more professional poll than TV2, found that 47 or 48% of young Norwegian men would vote for Donald Trump.
Yes.
That is the young men. That is the young generation. And that result demonstrates that the media is already losing its grip on its narrative.
That's right.
Once you start losing that generation, the rest begins to follow. And I think there are a lot of factors for that result, but ultimately what it's going to result in, I think, are that's going to be a big demographic that's only getting older, and they're going to be starting they're starting their lives basically. They're going to be going into position in life where they have to consider whether or not they want to have children, what they want to do for a living for the rest of their life, how they're going to earn their money, all this. These people are going to be very important to vote. And whoever can get that vote, it's not going to be the status quo right now. It's going to have to be something different. If they're saying that they're going to support Trump on the other side of the pond, and which is why I think we're going to start seeing politicians similar in nature to Trump all throughout Europe, all throughout the West, because these young men, young people, but especially young men, they're craving that kind of, maybe the hero aspect plays a role, something that unites the country, because that's one thing that the left has done so well in recent history, this postmodernist kind of effort to destroy the value of everything, to destroy the meaning of everything, to destroy what it means to have a nation, to destroy the institution of a family, to destroy just these things that built civilization. And you're shunning these young men and telling them they don't matter anymore. We don't need you. Go to the corner. Your inclinations as a man are wrong. You need to reconsider how you behave and how all of this. It's eventually it will have to change, and there's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of people who are pulling the strings today.
I totally agree. And on that note, Austin, we end this conversation. We would like to invite you back at some later date when we see the results of Trump's policy.
Happy to come back.
Thank you very much.